we don't hope for bad things. Does that make sense? We fear bad things. You know, hope looks to the future for good things, right? Fear looks to the future for bad things. It's not about fear. In fact, it's the antidote to fear. It says faith is the substance, and I like the word substance because it implies that it brings some degree of reality to the things that we hope for. It's not just a blind hope. There's something underlying it. There's some reality to it. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. Then it says the evidence of things not seen. Now this is a key thought because this tells me that faith has to do with things that we don't see. Now it doesn't limit it to just what we see with our eyes, but things not seen means perceived by the physical senses. That's what it means. Things that we perceive by the physical senses. Faith goes beyond that. Now if you think about it, lots of things are beyond what we can understand by our physical senses. Now, we don't really realize that until you stop to really think about what is it that you actually really truly know by your physical senses. You know, most of the things we say we know are things we've either read or things somebody has told us about, things we've heard about, you know. Like we would say, for instance, oh, I can say, I know the earth is round. Well, I don't really know that. I've seen pictures. I've heard people tell me, and I'm not denying it, by the way. I'm not trying to say that it's not. See, I think it's the pictures that I've seen and the explanations I've heard are entirely plausible. I believe, that's better to say, I believe the earth is round based on the evidence that I've seen. I've never been out in space. I've never looked back at the earth, but I've seen pictures of it. And the evidence that I've seen convinces me that, you know, I can, but see, here's what I believe it. I believe it is because of the evidence. Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying? So faith has to do with things not seen. And interestingly, verse 2 says, by it the elders obtained a good report. And as I said, this to me is really one of the most interesting and important things about it. The elders obtained a good report from God because of faith. And he could have put anything in there. He didn't say because of their hard work, or because of their self-sacrifice, or because of their obedience, or because of, you know, anything they did. In fact, the rest of this chapter is given to telling us what they did and showing how it was by faith that they did those things that they did. Because they believed God, and they believed His Word. And in fact, the next verse, verse 3, puts it in a kind of a universal scale and very much the things that we're talking about. It says, by faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the Word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. Now he says it's by faith that we understand that. Now why does he say it's by faith that we understand that? It's because we didn't see the worlds made with our eyes. I wasn't there, were you? No. It's by faith that we understand that the worlds were framed by the Word of God. Now if you read what scientists say, and I've read a book by Stephen Hawking. I don't know if you ever heard of him. Right? He's one of the most well-known and most notable physicists alive today. He's in a wheelchair and he speaks through a little speech synthesizer. He has a kind of a robot voice. He's a smart guy. And he has a book about the origins of the universe, and he explains it very succinctly. He and scientists like him believe in something called the Big Bang. Now, they weren't there, right? But they say, because of the evidence of looking through telescopes, and they see all the galaxies and all the different constellations and things, everything is moving away from some theoretical central point. And so they speculate from that Stephen Hawking said in his book that in the beginning, the whole universe was all the mass of the universe was compacted into a tiny little mass of matter about the size of a golf ball. And then there was a great explosion called the Big Bang, and everything went flying off, and somehow the orderly world that we see just sort of over billions and billions of years just sort of gelled somehow into what we see. And that's the way they explain it. Now a skeptic might say, where did the golf ball come from? But grant them the golf ball. We'll grant them the golf ball. But here's what I want to point out. Stephen Hawking was not there. No physicist was there. Nobody saw it with their physical senses. They just concocted or made up or created a story to explain what they do see. But to me, to me, that is not as plausible To me, it's more plausible to say a creator made an orderly universe. If I were walking through the woods, for instance, and found a fancy machine, I wouldn't say, wow, this thing grew out of the ground. I would say somebody made this. This is obviously someone's creation. Someone made this machine. It's got knobs and dials all over it and antennas. I don't know. I would say somebody pretty smart made this, because look at it. You know, it's orderly. It's obviously not natural. So when you look around the natural world, I think to me, it's more plausible to see the natural world and think I see the hand of a creator here than to think there was a big explosion. Any big explosion I've ever seen on television or anywhere else, it didn't result in order. It resulted in disorder and chaos. And anyway, all that aside, you know, I don't fault. I'm not. You know, if they want to believe in a Big Bang, that's okay. But understand, it's faith. It's a different kind of a faith. They believe that. See, they believe that. But for me, here's what he says here: through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the Word of God. Now, if somebody says, prove that to me, I can't prove that. It's by faith we understand. If I could prove it, then our physical senses would have. And you know what? If you can perceive it with your physical senses, you don't need faith. Faith has to do with the things you don't see. That's what verse 1 said. Faith is the evidence of things not seen. Now, where we live in our ordinary life, we don't have, in our ordinary life, the origins of the universe don't really impact us, except maybe just something to turn over in our minds to entertain ourselves. I mean, it's not really that important. But there are things that we deal with in our everyday life that are vital to us and much more important. And it's important to understand that what our part in this Christian life, in this relationship with God, the God who, by the way, it says here, framed the worlds by the Word of God, so that then he adds here, the things which are seen are made of things which do not appear. And the reason he says that in verse 3 is to let you know that everything that your physical senses perceive had their origins with something invisible. Why does he tell you that? It's because faith has to do with those invisible things. Faith has to do with the Creator on the other side of the Creator that's greater than the creation. The Creator who made this creation and is therefore greater than anything that's existing in this physical realm. Now, this expression or this idea of faith has already come up in the book of Hebrews. We jumped in here in chapter 11. Obviously, there's other chapters before. So I'd like to go back and look at how it's used to help us get a little understanding of how the writer, at least, is thinking about faith. It's in chapter 4, where it comes up earlier for one place. In chapter 4, faith comes up. And let's just notice how it comes up. I think we can see something about it. Chapter 4 of Hebrews, the writer says, let us therefore fear, lest a promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. For unto us was the gospel preached, as well as unto them, but the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. Now, first of all, I need to tell you who them is, because we've jumped in again in chapter 4. In chapter 3, we find out that the them he's talking about are the old covenant people of God, the nation of Israel, who were held captive in Egypt, and Moses brought them out, and they crossed the Red Sea, and God was bringing them not out of Egypt to be lost in the wilderness, but to bring them into a promised land, or the land of promise, a promised land. And by the way, what God told them about the promised land is, he says it flows with milk and honey, whereas where they were in Egypt, they were slaves. And he said, it's not going to be like in Egypt where you had to irrigate and water the fields with your foot. In other words, you had to pump a pump or make it work by effort. He said, in this land that you're going to, it flows with milk and honey. In other words, you're not going to be a slave. You're coming out of a bad life into a life of where things flow. You can put it that way. Now, that's an analogy, or that's a shadow type of the Christian life. We come out of a life without Christ into a life where his blessings just flow. Like that guy, when I said that, it reminded me of that guy in the county jail who was, facing charges for stealing the car that caught on fire. And, that's like a life, that's like Israel being in bondage in Egypt. That's a miserable way to live, to be in the jail and facing charges, and I don't know where he ended up. If you could come out of that and into a life where God's blessings just flow, why would you not want to, But here it says, and we're going to look at this, it says, for unto us was the gospel preached, as well as unto them. Now the them he's referring to, as we find out in the previous chapter, the children of Israel. And it said, The word preached did not profit them or didn't help them. Why didn't it profit them? Or why didn't it result in what God wanted it to result in blessing?